My name is Don Erickson. I am the CEO of the Security Industry Association based in the US. And it's my pleasure to be with you this evening, and I appreciate the invitation to be a part of the conference. As I've recently said to my friend Yaron Zussman with Mago Systems many times, I wish I could be with you in Israel this year, but hopefully we'll get together next year and have a chance to meet and talk about the industry together. With that said, let's go ahead and jump into the presentation, and I'm happy to provide my perspective about the security market in the US. I'm sure we could all agree there certainly are some silver linings to this virtual environment throughout the industry, and the opportunity to engage in these type of conferences certainly helps to strengthen our global industry engagement and our engagement with Israeli security companies specifically on matters related to policy, market research, and collaboration. As you may know, SIA represents approximately a dozen Israeli companies, some of whom are attending with us today as fellow sponsors, such as MIFRAM, and we represent several companies with a strong footprint in Israel, notably Israel. I'd also like to say a special word of thanks to a member of our own team, Joe Hollerer, who really was a catalyst for our involvement in today's program. Thank you, Joe. SIA in the United States is really the leading trade association for more than 1,100 companies. We're also the premier sponsor for ISC West, which is held each year in March, which is the single largest conference in the United States for the security industry and really the platform for effective networking throughout the entire security ecosystem. At ISC West, SIA also manages the new product showcase program and designs all of the education, more than 100 sessions under the umbrella of our SIA Education at ISC West conference program. What we're particularly proud about is that our association has diversified its membership over the last several years to be more reflective and inclusive of the security ecosystem as a whole. Our core is always going to be security manufacturers, but in recent years, we've diversified to the point of having an incredible number of security integrators, both nationwide and global integrators, as well as independent integrators, as well as distributors, service providers, including monitoring companies, as well as specifiers of security products and investment firms. What I'd like to do today is provide you with insight into really four key areas of the security industry to provide our perspective. And I'd like to start with just a general overview of the security market. And it's impossible to talk about the market, but of course, without looking back on the past 6 months. So beginning in March, as we all saw, from project delays and disruptions, efforts to have security professionals declared quote unquote essential here in the US, adapting to a mostly virtual work environment, and quite frankly, declining revenues of an average of perhaps 20% for manufacturers and integrators in Q2, we have certainly had our fair share of challenges in the industry, both globally and certainly within the US. However, as is often the case after major societal economic disruption, this industry's resilience shines through, and we can absolutely be proud of that. The demand for security and life safety products in the US remains strong. Competition across the country is healthy, and the US government has infused needed liquidity into the market and provided assistance to security businesses to help with operational expenses. And above all else, innovation and the ability of companies to adapt to this pandemic continues to accelerate and provide a winning formula for success for security solution providers. Because after all, security is essential. Well, of course, have there been winners and losers in the security market when we think about it during this period? Maybe. Cloud-based services continue to enjoy widespread adoption during COVID-19. Demand for video and video analytics has increased in several markets, including healthcare and retail, that we'll talk about in a few minutes. Ensuring that manufacturers and integrators invest in cybersecurity hygiene and adopt new policies is becoming a part of normal business practices. Remarkably, however, and I know we have many cyber companies in the audience today, far too many enterprises have not developed robust cybersecurity practices. And for SIA itself during this pandemic, our own standard, known as the Open Supervised Device Protocol, or OSDP, has broken through as the leading international access control standard recognized by the IEC earlier this year. And as you may know, and I know many of you are in the access control market, OSDP has several advantages over the weakened standard and previous access control communication methods, including higher security, advanced functionality, increased centric experience by input and output, and more clear and functional interoperability into IoT. So with that said, and over the next several minutes, let's dig into those 4 areas that I indicated. So I know from speaking with the conference organizers that many of you are currently operating in the US market or thinking about entering the US market. As I mentioned earlier, our market is very competitive and we welcome additional entrants from Israel and from around the world. And when you think about it, the key to our success has really been through the US-Israel Free Trade Agreement that was adopted back in 1985 and proven to be an incredible success in terms of the exchange of goods between our 2 countries. In 2017 alone, for example, US imports from Israel totaled more than $21 billion and increasing dramatically each year since over the last 3 years. When you think about the US market, it's important to view it as a very complex market, though, although competition does thrive. And there are different levels of government with different restrictions, not the least of which are the 50 states, each of whom, if you're an integrator, have their own licensing requirements that we'll talk about shortly, as well as different tax treatments. And on top of that, an entire regime of tax and regulatory policy that's imposed by the federal government. But for startup companies from Israel looking at the US, I would encourage you to look at agencies such as the Small Business Administration and the General Services Administration, or GSA, that provide education and training, as well as, in some cases, financial assistance for how you can better introduce your product into the US market, market it, and become more successful. Next, I'd like to talk about some of the key questions you should ask and topics that may help guide your decision to become more operational within the US. So before you decide to expand to the US market, I strongly encourage you to contact each of the state chambers of commerce that operate in the US, as well as local county chambers of commerce. Identify other trade associations in addition to SIA that may operate within the security industry and leverage their resources. As I alluded to, there are multiple grant programs managed by the Small Business Administration, as I said, and the General Services Administration, as well as the National Science Foundation, that provide grants for small businesses as well as startup companies to help them penetrate the market with security products. And of course, there are some statutory requirements that you should be familiar with that SIA has resources on related to what's known as the Buy America Act, as well as the Buy American Act, that impact the security sales channel, then also impact your ability to enter the market. A few minutes ago, I talked about and alluded to the licensing requirements that face integrators who seek to become operational in each of the 50 states. And throughout the United States, unfortunately, the licensing requirements are a patchwork of different rules and requirements for security integrators. So in the US, many states require integrators to be licensed to install burglar alarms, video access control, or all 3. And as I said, the requirements vary from state to state, and it's incredibly confusing to make sense of that for those who are unfamiliar with our market. For example, in our home state of Maryland, any person installing burglar alarms or electronic access control must pass a background check and show proof of insurance. Individuals installing locks, including electronic access control, but not burglar alarms, may apply for a locksmith license instead. Let's turn now for a moment to look at current economic conditions and expectations for Q3 and Q4. SIA produces what is known as the Security Market Index, which is a survey of our top 100 executives in the industry who are member companies who provide their perspective on the economic direction of our industry and the confidence they have in the industry looking forward. So as you can see, our security market index, which is measured numerically, shows reason to be cautiously optimistic about the future of the industry as we enter Q3 and Q4. We have approximately 17% of respondents project a strong recovery, 50% project a slow recovery, and the rest are mixed opinion. But I think, as evidenced through new innovations such as skin temperature cameras and artificial intelligence and other technologies we'll talk about, there's reason definitely to be optimistic looking forward. However, during this COVID period, we have seen some market shrinkage, as evidenced by this slide. Now, as you can see from the period between 2019 and 2024, as it relates to physical security equipment, COVID-19 has definitely had an impact. But again, there's reasons to be optimistic. We're not seeing, despite the $300 million in market shrinkage, we're not seeing growth to contract as much as one would expect in 2021 and beyond. So in 2019, we're seeing projected demand at 6.5 billion, slight dip in 2020, understandably, and then a rebound back to 2021 of approximately $6.6 billion. Each year, our association produces what's known as the security megatrends. Here we identify through survey work with our executives and other market leaders throughout the industry, the trends that are truly shaping and in often cases disrupting the security industry. And on the right side of the slide, you'll see the top 10 trends that we identify for 2020. The top one, based on this audience profile, will not surprise you. Cybersecurity continues to impact, in often cases, disrupt the security industry. We'll talk a bit about artificial intelligence and relatedly facial recognition. And then lastly, I'll single out one that I won't go too deep on today, but as you look at the US security market, it's an important one, and that is workforce development. Recently, SIA and another association in the security industry known as Electronic Security Association established the Foundation for Advancing Security Talent, or FAST. And you can learn more about FAST by visiting advanциngsecurity.org. And the purpose of FAST is to promote the industry in the United States as a viable source of employment to community colleges, to trade schools, to the cybersecurity community. Because what you'll see once you enter the security market is that there is clearly a war for talent occurring in the United States. The security industry is, rightly or wrongly, not often thought upon as being a top source of employment compared to Silicon Valley and other tech jobs. But we're determined to change that. And through the efforts of FAST, and hopefully with your involvement, we can help you become more successful finding qualified talent in the US as you build up your presence in this market. So as I mentioned, cybersecurity. Before I do that, this is our top trend. Let me talk about a dynamic in the US that may also be common in Israel. And that is in the area of decision-making. Traditionally, over physical security investment and the acquisition of products and services, those decisions were made by the security directors, physical security directors within enterprises. Today, and in recent months and years, that decision-making authority has evolved. So for example, in the federal government market, the chief information security officer within federal agencies is oftentimes the individual who's making decisions about investment in cybersecurity infrastructure and solutions. And this has been a gradual evolution of decision-making, but one that is expected to accelerate as our industry becomes more converged and becomes more IT-centric in the years ahead. The biggest threats, probably not surprising, malware over 80%, phishing, and ransomware are all top of mind and potential threats for your customers, both globally and in the United States. So when you think about what are the contributors or the causes or the vulnerabilities of cybersecurity threats, I think this is a good indication. So with our partner at ESA Thought Lab, which is part of the Wall Street Journal's research arm, we asked many organizations in the United States, which areas of your organization's IT infrastructure do you believe are most vulnerable to cyber risk? Top of the list, Internet of Things devices, all the way down to legacy infrastructure and printers and embedded infrastructure. There are undoubtedly, as we look at this, there are undoubtedly many different causes of cybersecurity failure in systems. Let's think about it for a minute. There are a few that come to mind. I mean, you could have inadequate security policy and process governance. You can have a reliance on security through obscurity, or assuming that nobody will ever test security. You could have inadequate software and firmware patching, which seems obvious, or inadequate testing of patches before installation. Even further, unencrypted, unauthenticated, and uncontrolled wireless communications within systems. Similarly, uncontrolled or unauthenticated communication between those systems. Poor password hygiene and insufficient segmentation of control system networks. A simple lack of auditing and audit monitoring on networks. Poor coding of control system software also, as we all know, causes failures. And a lack of configuration management and tracking for hardware and software. You know, we have solutions, and I'm sure you do, and recommendations and best practices of how to overcome these challenges, and we would love to collaborate further with you to develop stronger cybersecurity policies. The important message or takeaway from the discussion of cybersecurity, though, is that all industries recognize from the C-suite on down that cybersecurity is the #1 threat facing businesses and citizens all around the globe, including in the US. And as a result, all industries are truly up in their game in various sectors. And you can see this here on the slide, from industrial to financial and technology, you're seeing in consumer, you're seeing considerable investment in cybersecurity budgets over the past year. That's not going to slow down at all. And as you're seeing a dramatic increase from 5% all the way up to 40% of investment in cybersecurity solutions, which is an incredible opportunity for Israeli companies in the audience today and that are members of SIA. Let's talk for a minute about our second megatrend, which is artificial intelligence. From a geopolitical standpoint, industry experts contend that an AI race is inevitable among global leaders. Indeed, this point reflects the US government's continued request for increased funding on AI initiatives in the context of defense, and I know we have several defense contractors present today, commerce, telecommunications, and cybersecurity. And I can also tell you, although we are facing a presidential election here in the US in just a matter of a couple of months, and our current administration has focused quite a bit on artificial intelligence and trying to prioritize artificial intelligence R&D and investment by federal agencies, I certainly don't expect that to change if there is a change in administrations. There will continue to be a federal commitment to artificial intelligence investment, certainly on a federal level, and certainly encouragement of R&D as it relates to A&I in various vertical markets as well. Related to AI is another notable trend, and that is the current debate that is really become top of mind as it relates to security technology in the United States, and that relates to facial recognition. There's an incredible debate going on in small communities, large cities throughout the United States, areas that you probably seek to serve, from communities in Massachusetts to New York City itself, to on the West Coast in the city of Portland. There are, in our opinion, an incredible number of proposals, ill-advised proposals that are proliferating throughout the United States at various levels of government that would simply outright ban the use of facial recognition technology, both in the public sector and for the first time, remarkably, in the private sector. In fact, in case you haven't heard, just yesterday, the Portland City Council in Oregon voted unanimously to ban the use of facial recognition technologies, amazingly, by private entities in public places, everywhere from shopping malls to grocery stores. this is your customer base in the US for many of you. And importantly, this is the first jurisdiction in the US to do so, and is a major concern for us at the Security Industry Association, and should be a concern for both manufacturers and integrators throughout the industry. The council also passed a prohibition on the use of facial recognition technology by the city government, and alarmingly, that they joined cities such as Boston and San Francisco, which have similar ordinances. Now, of course, we're concerned about the spread of these policies across the United States, and will continue to be very aggressive combating wholesale bans on the use of facial recognition technology. In our view, we certainly respect and recognize that some community leaders in the US, who you will deal with, if not already dealing with in the US market, have expressed deeply held views calling for the end of facial recognition technology by law enforcement and the private sector. We certainly disagree. Facial recognition technology, I hope we all can agree, offers tremendous benefits to society when used effectively and responsibly, but with appropriate safeguards. And our posture at this time is to invite any stakeholder, including communities of color, to sit down with us and review well thought out principles that we've developed that are available on the Security Industry Association website at securityindustry.org as it relates to facial recognition technology, and engaging with us in meaningful discussions that lead to truly common sense approaches to how this technology is used. Let me take a minute and talk briefly about some of these principles. We believe that our principles should apply to facial recognition tools across safety and security applications in both public and private sector settings. And they should be reflected in the development of any organizational or public policies addressing the use of these technologies. Some of our core principles as it relates to FR include ensuring transparency surrounding the use of FR, establishing a clear and defined purpose for the use of FR by organizations, using high-performing and accurate technology, and importantly, incorporating human oversight and review, particularly as it relates to any discussion about the ethical use of security technology, protecting data security, ensuring privacy by design, and most fundamentally, investing in and providing training and education for users of the technology. I don't think any of us would disagree with the idea or the concept or the principle of improving or eliminating biased or discriminatory software. And I know there's been some amazing work done by an agency known as NIST within our Department of Commerce that has shown that technology has evolved so effectively that the percentage of allegedly discriminatory positive tests for FR technology has declined dramatically in recent years. It's always exciting for me to talk, as we move further in this presentation, to talk about vertical markets and the opportunities that are there for Israeli companies to become market leaders in a number of different markets. And SIA has done quite a bit of work working with our research partner, IHS Markit, who is now known as Omdia, to analyze the various trends that are impacting spending and buying habits in certain key vertical markets that include the healthcare market, the education market, oil and gas, and retail. And I'm sure these are all top of mind for you as well. Well, let's get started. So let's start with the healthcare market. So today, the healthcare market represents approximately a $1.1 billion opportunity in physical security. As you're probably aware, the primary threat in the healthcare market is data theft, patient data theft. So hospitals are exploring more advanced security solutions, for example, biometrics, to augment traditional systems. Other threats include unauthorized entry, which can be mitigated through video surveillance and access control solutions. The physical security systems integration and equipment market in healthcare, as I said, is worth approximately $1.1 billion, but importantly, and in a very exciting way, is expected to grow to more than $1.5 billion in 2022, just a short period away. Further, managing data from controlled entrances is undoubtedly a real challenge for healthcare institutions, and the average healthcare facility manages the second largest quality of data of all the vertical markets behind only the transportation sector. This data, of course, must be protected from cyber attacks, providing a great deal of opportunity for Israeli companies interested in the healthcare market. The important thing to keep in mind, perhaps the most important thing to keep in mind as you look at entering the healthcare market or accelerating your growth in that market, is the regulation. Healthcare is a very heavily regulated industry that has implications on security spending and investment in the United States. HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, is a mandatory regulation for all healthcare facilities tied to spending and governing data privacy and security decisions. In the United States, another very viable and robust market is the K-12 education market. Taken together with the higher education market, the physical security systems integration equipment market in education is expected to grow from $2.7 billion, nearly twice the healthcare market, in 2018 to more than $3.2 billion by 2022. Video is by far the biggest segment in the education market. And then sadly in the US, active shooters are the most concerning threat. Schools would like to adopt more advanced security solutions without turning facilities into quote unquote prisons, and find that right balance between school books versus locks. And as the parent of 3 teenagers, I certainly can relate to the importance of finding that right balance. With any sector, there's of course challenges to entering the education sector. First and foremost is that we have over 100,000 public schools in the United States. They're not funded nearly enough through the federal government, and certainly not by state and local governments. We tried to do our part. SIA has led the effort in the security industry to fund what's known as the U.S. Department of Justice Secure Our Schools program for approximately $50 million a year. Certainly not enough, though, to fund all the public schools, not to mention provide eligibility for private institutions. There are competing priorities among physical security investments, as well as things such as risk assessments and training for faculty and staff. And then our own research has found that most school officials will only consider security providers with whom they have a prior working relationship. As may be the case in Israel, certainly in the US, decisions about education funding, although derived from the federal government, are made on a very local level by local school boards. And that's why those personal relationships are so important. Next, let's take a look at the retail and petrochem markets. Now, you would think in this COVID environment that retail has taken a big hit. And in some cases that may be the case. But there's still a lot of reasons to be optimistic about retail as an opportunity, particularly because of the use and the increased use of security devices in a non-traditional way. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But in 2018, our research with IHS Omdia indicated that the retail market represented approximately a $1.2 billion opportunity and was expected to grow to nearly $2.2 billion in 2022. So let's pause for a second. So when we talk about healthcare, education, and retail, really robust and exciting growth opportunities expected to occur despite COVID-19 over the next 1 to 2 years. However, compared to the healthcare environment, for example, retail has less regulatory restrictions since it's more of a commercial to commercial buying arrangement. In light of that dynamic, most of the vendors acknowledge a strong return on investment with retail users, and that's what we're hearing from our members. Depending on the size of the end user, retail owners tend to have higher budgets, which mean they possess flexibility to acquire advanced security solutions such as high-resolution cameras, video analytics software, biometric functionalities, cloud-based storage, as long as the solution is not cost inhibitive. Analytics is really key in the retail market for purposes of heat mapping, people counting, and quality control management. In the Petrochem market, we recently conducted a study looking at this market, specifically the oil and gas market. And our study varied from the previous three verticals because it focused on the qualitative perception of traditional, advanced, and autonomous security solutions at petrochem facilities. I think a key takeaway is that aside from drones, most petrochemical operators see tremendous value in geothermal cameras versus standard video surveillance. So I hope you found the information about those four verticals in particular very helpful to you as you look at entering the market. One point I wanted to make as we wrap up and conclude is that as you're examining the federal market in particular, which could also have an impact on the vertical markets you choose to serve, is that the United States Department of Homeland Security has produced a strategy called the National Infrastructure Protection Plan, or NIP. And NIP is a strategy between the public sector and the private sector about how each community can work together to mitigate threats impacting critical infrastructure in each of the 16 sectors identified by the Department of Homeland Security. So I encourage you to look at the NIP, study it, become a trusted advisor to your customers about the merits of NIP and how it impacts critical infrastructure. You can find a copy of that strategy at dhs.gov. So in the spirit of collaboration, I'd like to conclude by again thanking our event organizers, the Institute, for their hospitality and the invitation to be a part of this event. I also want to put my hand out and encourage us to work even more closely together as one industry in support of further growth for all the companies that are operating, whether it be manufacturers, integrators, monitoring companies throughout the entire ecosystem. And there are different ways to do that. We can have events such as this that SIA can host or the Institute can host, but you also could become part of our organization and be part of our network where you can establish new relationships that are going to benefit you in the United States market. You could also more specifically work more closely with Joe Hollower on our team through our Global Commerce Working Group that looks at a variety of different supply chain issues, including trade and tariffs. And then you could participate in SIA events. We all know how effective networking can be. We're in a virtual environment right now. We're hopefully a year from now going to be back to the in-person environment. And as I mentioned, we have exceptional networking events, including at ISC West, Securing New Ground, executive event in New York City, and ISC East. But more than anything, I just hope you and wish that you have incredible success as you look at the US market, and just to let you know that our entire team is here to help you in any way we possibly can. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your conference.